Your Lending Era, the podcast where we dive into the world of residential, business and commercial finance, bringing you expert insight, tips and strategies to help you navigate the intricate lending landscape of Australia. I'm one of your hosts, Jessica, and in today's episode we are chatting about all things positive debt. I didn't know there was such thing as positive debt, but I've been told there is. So joining me here today, we have Trilogy Funding's Managing Director, David Thomas.
Hey Jess, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. You got through the intro. That's good.
Oh, first time this week. Mate, I said positive debts and I've got some chuckles going on here. You can tell that I'm like a young 27-year-old who's like, debt's bad.
Don't worry, Dave can make anything positive.
And as you can hear to our listeners, there's a third voice here today. Now let's roll out the red carpet. Actually, we do have a red rug under us today, so we literally have done that. We are joined by a financial services juggernaut. He has worked in the financial planning space for close to 20 years and has become somewhat of a local celebrity through his appearances on The Today Show and Koshy's Biz. Joining us here today, we have Luke Smith.
I've been absolutely stitched up there. But anyway.
You forgot the radio show.
Oh, the radio show. Dave, quick plug.
So Friday afternoons, 4:30 on 2CC.
This is true. Yes, exactly right. So we've been running that for, we're nigh on 5 years now. So
wow, a lot longer than we've been doing this.
A lot longer than we've been doing this.
I don't want to say there's a bit of plagiarism going on, but inspired.
A little bit of plagiarism. I think there's a lot of plagiarism going on. But you know what? What do they say? You once said rising tide lifts all boats.
Yep.
Happy days.
Dave's the little tugboat, but he's made his way here. So let's get started with a very quick introduction about yourself, Luke. Tell us a little bit about you and Envision Financial Services.
Yeah, so I've been in the financial services industry now for nigh on 23 years. I've been giving advice for probably the best part of 2 decades, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And we have a private financial planning firm located in Phillip where we specialise in superannuation and investment. We also specialise in personal and business insurance. And that animal has continued to evolve over the years. I'm very fortunate to have a number of long-term staff which make the day-to-day stuff a little bit more enjoyable. And we have a very high level of contact and interaction with clients. So it's a nice place to turn up and work, and I sort of try to make that the focus of what we do and how we do it in relation to dealing with clients and dealing with the staff internally. And it just continues to go from strength to strength. And off the back of that perennial question that we all get as service providers is, well, what about this and how about that? And I wish I'd known about that. We started the radio show many years ago. That then turned into a podcast. That then turned into the recording and a YouTube channel as an educational content idea to try and meet that changing demand where people really don't want to read stuff.
Yes.
So if we could give people information that was clear and concise, they could then try and sort of navigate their way through the unknown, because I, like anybody else, don't want anything stuffed down my neck. So I think if you can explain and clarify in what in my world is a very acronym-driven industry, and you guys are very similar in the way that you've got P&I, IO, offset, redraw, this, that. If we can try and demystify those sorts of unknown factors for clients, I think we provide a better level of material, a better level of education and a better level of service as we provide clarity to the decisions that people come to us to try and find the answer to. So that then led to the book. We released the book in March, Smart Money Strategy, Your Ultimate Guide to Financial Planning. And that was off the back of people coming in, having a chat and then saying, well, where do you go to read about this stuff? Where could I learn about these types of strategies? And I tried to sort of think of a way that we could address the common queries that I would get and you would get from different segments of the community, so that we could try and provide clear and concise information in a light-hearted, fun way of being able to sort of make yourself more aware of what's available. And as a financial planner, I think, my role and my objective is to try and remove the capacity for people to say, I wish. I wish I'd known. Yeah. I wish someone had told me. I wish I'd known that before I did it. And if I can try and remove the I wish in a conversation, there's a very good chance you're moving forward in a positive direction, making informed decisions to try and achieve the personal and financial outcomes that you're striving for over your working life.
Perfect. And we've done business together for got to be a decade or more. And whenever I get a client that has spoken with Luke, that's exactly what they say. Yep, he was great, clear, concise. I know this, I know this, I know this. And it's just a moment of clarity about, they were unsure and now they've got a very clear understanding as to what they have been doing, what they are doing and what they are going to do in the future. And I think there's good power in that for clients, great value add.
I think we laugh amongst a core group of sort of professionals we deal with that you end up in the net.
Yes.
And people find a lot of clarity and comfort in being in the net because they know that we hold each other very accountable for what we do, but we also understand the way that people communicate so that we can actually put somebody with the right advisor within that group of people that we deal with in a similar vein to the two of you understanding the lending appetite for a particular institution. I have people that come in and ask me for money, for borrowings, for this, for houses, and I have no hesitation in dealing with Trilogy as I've done, as I say, for more than a decade, because I know that you're going to get an unbiased answer to technical questions, personal questions, and your ability to think outside the box for me is really where the value is added. Yeah. And I use the analogy of going to a restaurant and asking for a medium rare steak. Well, that's what you're there to do. But if you can add value in relation to the offset account, the redraw, this facility, access to this cash, separate the loan, and all of the various technical things that people don't realise they're going to get, that for me is really where you guys add the value the most.
Yeah. Probably segues into what we brought you in to chat about today. So obviously financial planning is quite broad, but what we want to chat about today is using leverage and using debt to create wealth. Now that might be, obviously that's borrowing to invest in some way, shape or form. So do you have any kind of key thoughts around that topic?
Yeah, look, I'm pro leverage, and here we laughed at the start. There's good debt and bad debt, and most people are very comfortable with deductible and non-deductible. And if we can try and use borrowings to enhance the opportunities and choices that we make, I think it's really beneficial for people. Whilst they do this in an environment where they understand what they're doing, I think I often say, start with why and come backwards from there. Why are we borrowing? Oh, well, I'm going to do it because everybody at work's got an investment property and I want investment property. Yeah, I'm not sure that's the answer. Yeah. So let's delve a little bit further into, I'd like to get access to a better quality asset. Okay. I'd like to buy a commercial building. Okay. I'd like to maximise my tax deductions and try and soak up distributable income out of something like a family trust. So there are a number of positives that are available to you as to why would I borrow? And then you can go out and create a property portfolio, a commercial portfolio. You could borrow against your family home and buy a portfolio of ETFs and listed shares. As long as people understand why they're going into it, how they're going to fund it, and think long-term, i.e., will rates go up? Have I allowed for a rate rise? Can I save? I think that's the biggest one that a lot of people miss. They love the idea of neutrally geared. They don't love the idea of negatively geared until it happens. And for 10 years, people have got away with making some rather risky decisions. And now with interest rates rising as they have, they're finding that we now need to kick the can for that shortfall between rent and interest. And it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, whilst the cost of living is going up and up and up. And some people now are actually concerned that they've got what they wish for. I'd love a negatively geared property. And you go, really? They go, yeah, well, actually now. So I think thinking longer term with this sort of stuff is important because it's that sort of driver to wealth and expanding your asset base and using good debt to your advantage. But also then thinking about how do I structure it and where am I going to hold the asset?
Yeah, okay. And that probably then does go into what types of debts would you generally consider to be favourable for wealth creation? And double ender here. How do you determine the optimal balance between leveraging and avoiding risk where possible?
Yeah, so to touch on that last one first, I think the understanding of what you're getting into. I think there are a lot of people that are under pressure at the moment from a cash flow perspective because I don't think they truly understood the implications of a rate rise.
Yep.
And when you're borrowing at 2 and 3 and you're servicing at 5, and now you're borrowing at 6 and servicing at 9, which is what you'd see on a day-to-day basis, I've got people coming in saying, well, I need to refinance this property, but they can't get the money that they've got. So I think that education piece right out of the gates for me is, from a peace of mind perspective, the greatest thing that you could provide to somebody so that they know exactly what they're going to be up for and they've allowed for the savings contingency in their budget and their lifestyle. Because we've all become accustomed to living at a certain way, and now funding that certain way can result in things needing to be shed.
Yep.
And a lot of people I find don't like changing their lifestyle, which can then lead to, well, how much debt can I carry? For me, borrowing against your family home is the least risky, if that's the best term to use, because if you consider that against something like a margin loan where you're going to pay a higher rate of interest, you've got a different type of security, which means you've potentially got a greater level of capital volatility and things to consider if the market moves against you. It's really important to make sure that you understand the security that you're giving, the interest rate that you're going to deal with, the cash flow out of the asset that you're going to find that will help to fund that debt, and then your savings capacity over the top of it. So that for me really is good security, good debt, good understanding of your budget, and again, aligning your why over the longer term, because you don't generally go into these borrowing situations over the short to medium term. They're generally a longer play on good quality assets so that you can try and maximise the capital growth. But again, structured correctly through good advice, again, comes back to that peace of mind of making sure that you've got the right components around you to get the outcome that you're after.
Yeah, and I think Luke kind of touched on it there in regards to knowing what's risky debt and knowing what's not risky debt. Like Luke just used the example of the margin loan and the home loan, right? So you've got one that's a margin loan, which is reviewed against the asset quite frequently. And then you move, if you then go, okay, well, and then the home loan reviewed at time of loan application and then not touched for 30 years. So if you've got a choice of how you're going to borrow the money, sometimes, we'll lay down the options for a client and say, well, if you're looking at buying, those shares, you could fund it with cash, you could fund it with a margin loan, you could borrow against your investment property, or you could borrow against your home, right? And then we look at the different ones and go, well, which one's kind of more appropriate for your level of risk? Because you've got all those options. Totally. You just need to choose one, right? And it's not based on rate. It's not based on ease of application. It's not based on any. It's just based on what is the least risky thing for me to do.
And I think that's it for me. You always borrow against your home first.
Yep.
And I know people have an emotional connection to their home more so than, say, a share. But if you're going to borrow, you want to try and have as little volatility as possible. And for the listeners, if you thought about my family home doesn't change in value at the same way BHP shares would. Yep. And we know that shares get marked to market every day. If things are good, they go up. If things are bad, they go down. And it only takes a rocket or two shot around the world for people to go, ooh, and we see values come off.
Yes.
Now, if you're borrowing and securing your debt against the value of your shares and they are moving up and down, you have significantly increased the potential for a margin call, which is just where you need to add more money into the loan to maintain certain percentages over an asset that isn't repriced or revalued with the same frequency. So you generally get a much better rate when you use your family home, and correct me if I'm wrong, with much better security, a better quality of asset and less volatility, which for me, it's that exhale where people go, that can't happen? No.
Yeah.
And
that's the clarity I think people want most.
We also see that you've listed shares as the example, but we sometimes see this with maybe an off-the-plan apartment that they've bought or something that's a little bit more of a speculative residential investment. You're like, okay, well, the investment property loan, that's going to be 5 years interest only. And in 5 years, we're going to then try and go to the bank and have it revalued and then potentially do something with that loan. So if we've got high amount of leverage on that, and low amount of leverage on the owner-occupied home, we're putting ourselves at a greater risk for having to do something that we don't want to do in 5 years' time, like sell the asset or whatever. And then the same rolls out to commercial property. So if you're bought a commercial property and it's got a 5-year lease in place and we've got a 5-year lease doc or something on it, and we're putting a client in a situation where we're like, we're going to heavily leverage against that asset and not leverage very heavily against the owner-occupied asset, that just puts us in a situation where later on down the track we might have to make some decisions that are unfavourable. Whereas, as Luke said before, sometimes, instead of doing 70% lease stock on that asset, maybe we could get away with a 50% loan-to-value ratio on a 30-year term that's non-reviewable.
Exactly.
But
Beautiful.
just borrow a little bit more against the home. Isn't that more comfortable over a long period of time?
Yeah, and I think that comes back to that structuring. I think that's where, you add the greatest value to people's situation is they're coming in saying, I have to do it like this. And we go, oh, hang on. Who said that? Well, all the ladies at work, this is what they do. And you go, well, you work in a bakery and I work at Trilogy Funding. So how about we think about this, this, this and this? And they go, oh. And I think people's capacity or level of engagement to come in and listen and learn, I think that for me is from a value perspective, again, how do I provide that peace of mind? How do we achieve that over the longer term and consider these various contingencies like inflation, cost of living, kids getting older, school fees, and sort of think with the end in mind over, well, this is what everyone does.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the value's really at, is that peace of mind and making something as freestanding, or as I say regularly, if it can wash its own face, we can leave it alone forever, which is great.
Yeah. And it's getting that individual advice, right? Yeah. When someone comes to get financial planning, you don't pull out a document and go, this is what everyone else does. Here you go. Here's $2,000. You say, talk to us about what is specific for your set of circumstances and what your outcomes are going to be.
And I have a similar experience with, say, gearing in a self-managed super fund. So people will come in and say, I want to put this house in a self-managed super fund. And I go, okay, sure. And then you've got to do this and this and this structure and that costs this and that costs this and that costs this. Now, let's talk interest rate, because as we know, lending in an SMSF is far more expensive than a traditional home loan. So people will come in having done all their numbers and go, oh, this all stacks up at 6.2. And I say, well, how does it look at 9? And they go, what do you mean? Well, did you know that super fund lending is at a much different rate to a normal home loan? And they go, oh. But in their head, they've had a chat to the ladies at the bakery. Yeah. Yes. And while they were rolling out the dough, all the numbers worked. They were probably doing the numbers in a flour on the table. And then they find out, whoops, some of our foundation information's a little wobbly. Yeah. And that's where I think, again, making people aware of their options is all we can really do, so that all we ever want is people to make an informed decision and have clarity around the way forward, and make the most of the data and information and structures that are available to them.
Yeah. Now, being in this kind of debt to build wealth topic, we do have to unfortunately talk about some of the risks and things that you would kind of always advise your clients about. Now, what would you say are the biggest potential risks and downsides that you generally disclose?
Generally, I think that...
Not generally disclose. I'd say you always disclose them. That was a bit of a bad wording piece. Sorry there.
Well, on a Tuesday, what I talk about...
It differs day to day. It depends where you were the night before, I suppose.
Exactly. No, look, I think that the biggest thing, and I, for those that know me, I don't have a grey area. No. Right? You're going to leave my office with the facts. You might not like the facts, and somebody else may tell you there are different facts, but I've got a clear conscience to say, hey, that sounds crazy. Yeah. Or you don't have the ammunition to do that. Yeah. Just because your mates are doing that doesn't mean you can do that. So I think managing that expectation and putting a level of realistic belief around the decision is the first sort of cab out of the rink. I think the quality and the pressure that people put on their cash flow without the contingency of what if this goes sideways. And I've always had a general rule of thumb that if you can take half of your discretionary savings, if you needed to fund something as a backup plan, if you can do that, great, let's swing for the fence. If you're having to sort of bank on depreciation and other tax considerations to make something work, that says to me you've gone too far. Yeah. I also think people talk gross numbers and not net numbers. And what I mean by that is, I'm going to buy this house, I'm going to buy this building, and it'll rent for this much a week. But it doesn't.
No.
And
They
everybody
never
goes,
do.
Exactly. So I think, again, if we can bring the reality check in and say, right, this rents for $1,000 a week, but you'll probably get 700 because you've got agent fees, you've got outgoings, you've got this, you've got body corporate, you've got... Now, show me how this stacks up with a 2% increase in rates, and what does that look like? And if that's, I'm going to have to pull the kids out of school and, Mrs. is going to have to lose her car. All right, well, let's not do that.
Yeah.
Or let's not spend 1.5. Let's spend $1 million. Let's spend 800. Let's not swing for the fence straight away. I would much rather people get something that they can pay down quickly and fill up an offset account on and have neutrally geared and left alone to then move into something else, or save enough to then move into a better quality asset progressively. You don't need to jump straight into something up to your neck, because what you'll then do is you'll put your cash flow under greater duress, which means you'll put your family under greater duress, which means then plenty of bad things come from stretching the elastic band too far. And I just don't think people need to. Yeah. Or, think about it another way and say, can I get other people involved here? What you probably need to do is get a couple of crazy mates together and say, hey, how about we go and buy this building? Now, on your own, you might go, I can't do that. But you get 3 or 4 like-minded mates together and go, hey, if we all threw some cash at this and borrowed a bit of money, we've dissipated the risk.
Yeah.
We've taken the individual pressure out. We've got multiple cash flows. We've got good equity. We've got good security. We've got all the goods in the equation. Then we just need to find a tenant and then let this thing bubble away for 10 or 15 years. I would much rather people do that and start thinking outside the box than thinking they need to carry the burden of that liability and that cash flow pressure on their own shoulders. And the last one I'd say is make sure everybody in the transaction understands the transaction.
Yes.
Because far too often I act as a quasi-marriage counsellor because he did this or she did this. And you need to be on board together because you're a family.
Yeah.
You're a couple, you're a partnership, you're a team, you're yin and yang, and everybody's got their role to play. So I think understanding the decision that people are going to make, I find a lot of spouses go, oh yeah, whatever he said, or oh yeah, whatever she said. And then when things come under pressure, it's like, you did this.
Yes.
And I think if you can take that away, and that loops back to, I wish I'd.
Yeah.
I wish I'd known.
Yeah.
I wish someone had told me. I wish I'd understood that.
Yeah. Because in this, legalities of documents for loans and things like that, black and white, there's no grey area, as you said before. If you've signed for something, you need to understand what you've signed for. If you've
100%.
guaranteed something, if you've leveraged something, if you've put one of your assets up, if you've put your income up to be taken as, information for that loan approval, then the bank has a document there that says that you are liable. So get some advice and understand what it is that you're agreeing to.
Very much so.
Yeah. I think David says more often, almost every day nearly, entering a transaction and exiting a transaction have the same value.
Yeah.
You've got to know what you're doing at either end. And if you're just going to sell it one day, that's not an acceptable exit. Like you need to know the 5, the 10, the 15-year plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I often say, in meetings when people come in and the SMSF one's a great one where they'll come in on the weekend and go, I bought this place, I'm going to stick it in my super fund. No, you're not. What do you mean? Well, A, B, C, D, E. Oh. Or I say regularly, think with the end in mind. How are we getting out of this? Because that then makes you think, well, the old, the old accounting adage, if you like, of, oh, well, she earns X and he earns Y, so we'll put 99% of it in her name, which might be a short-term tax benefit and a long-term capital gains tax problem.
Yeah.
You need to think about, how am I going to dispose of this asset? Do I buy it jointly? Do I buy it in a family trust? Do I hold it in my super fund? What's my capacity to pay this off? So that you are going into something, yes, I understand what I'm doing at the start, but very rightly, what am I doing at the end and what are the implications? Because too many times people come in and say, oh, that one's in my name and I've got to cop all the capital gains tax on that. I'm going, why didn't you buy it jointly, or why didn't you buy that in a family trust? Oh, well, she was earning a lot more than me at the time. So you've thought short term for a long-term asset.
Yep.
And I think you need to align that view far better and think with the end in mind, because that's ultimately how you can maximise the leverage that you've taken out to buy something, but also the return over time that can maximise the retirement capital that can then fund you, later down the track.
Okay, well, I think we've kind of covered that off then. This has actually gone very smoothly.
It has. It has.
We've got a professional in the room. We're no Koshy, so this is probably a lot easier.
He's brought it down a level to deal with us today, but I really appreciate it.
Has the RMs on today?
I've been dealing with you for over a decade. What are you talking about? I learn as much from you as you learn from me, I think.
Okay, well, let's round this all off with a quick example or two of how yourself and Envision Financial have been able to successfully use debt to grow wealth for one of your clients.
Look, I think it's like most things. It's coming down and saying, well, what do you want to do? I think, of late we've had a number of people that have been trying to get out of that resi space and into the commercial space. And I think as you move down that time frame that is your working life, it's really getting people to understand the quality of the income stream that they're going to get in retirement. Because for me, a geared asset is not an asset that is of use.
Yep.
You need to remove that gearing by either pulling the money out of the asset because we've seen an uplift in price, as we said earlier, but also then being able to say, well, I am picking up $50,000 of rent out of asset A or asset B. And I think that's where, we try and add that value of, finding a situation where, for example, somebody sold a resi property recently, bought a commercial space and had done a very good job of actively saving to clear the debt to then sell in the high of what was that sort of COVID stupidity, to then move into an asset that they could run their business through because it gave them location stability, it gave them cash flow stability, and it gave them a transition from an estate planning perspective because it was a multi-generational business in the family. So, that's one example where understanding your debt objectives and managing your cash flow can then set you up over a period of time. And that's not a short-term thing. That's very much thinking with the end in mind and moving into a better quality asset, because then you have a higher yield from the asset that you hold. You have better security. You have business continuity. And I think they're the considerations that people need to have, not just what is this rent for a week or where is it? Because everyone comes in and goes, oh, it'll double every 10 years. Yeah, but will it? And I'd question it does.
Not in all locations, definitely.
And this is where I actually say to people, it's houses in streets, it's streets in suburbs, it's suburbs in towns. You can't make these old 1975 assumptions of, oh, it'll double every 10 years. Whoever came up with that, there were too many Johnny Walkers. Especially in the last little bit, because there are plenty of people that bought properties 2017, 2018, 2019 that are now going because of the change in the economic environment that we've seen. So I think if we can help people make good decisions around the assets that they buy, we can try and move them forward to that position of security from a cash flow perspective. Because debt's great, but I'm also pro paying it off.
Yeah.
Because a geared asset doesn't provide cash flow. And I say to somebody, why have you got it? And what is it doing for you? And if your answer to those two isn't good, then we've got a problem.
Yep. And I tend to find this with clients sometimes. They'll have these amazing ideas, but as soon as the amazing idea leaves their mouth and hits someone else's ears, it sounds really silly. And sometimes it's just trying to explain your amazing idea to a financial planner that makes you, as soon as you hear your own words, you go, actually, I know that this doesn't make sense, but I was there on the weekend and it had beautiful views and it had this and it had that and it was in this street or blah, blah, blah. Or I've always wanted it. And then, but the reality of it, the numbers don't make any sense.
Yeah.
Or the time of purchasing it in your life doesn't make sense. Or taking on that much debt at your age doesn't make sense. Or, so there's all this kind of stuff. And I think that's where working with a financial planner and thinking long-term really has its benefits.
And I think it's also, part of how you explain serviceability and the lens that the bank uses at different stages of your life, whether you're an employee or self-employed person. How does the bank look at me? And you might say, well, I've got an amazing business and I earn amazing income and I do A, B and C and this is amazing. And why won't the bank roll the red carpet out to me and give me $5 million? And the bank says, you can have 800 grand. And these people come in shattered
Yeah.
because their expectations were flawed right out of the gates.
Yep.
And then you tell them the truth because you understand the lend that the bank's going to put on their situation. And you can look at a deal probably in 5 minutes and go, that's not going there or there, but it would fit over here, because banks, like insurance companies and any other third-party provider, they have an appetite for risk. And you need to fit their appetite for risk, just like we need to mediate their expectations of risk so that everybody can get to a point where the deal works. I think we also find with coastal properties.
Yep.
Oh, I'm going to buy a $2 million place down here, and the highest rent in that coastal town in the last 10 years was $600 a week. And you go, this doesn't work.
No.
And it's only when you sit down and go through those numbers that they go, oh, so you just need to find a spare $25,000 to cover that shortfall. And then you see there's that gulp of hesitation of, okay, yeah, Dave, this isn't going to work. So, on to the next opportunity.
We get that quite
But again,
often.
we'd rather get that out at the start than have that, because for 20 plus years, people have the perception that I'm just an average person.
Yeah.
I'm not extravagant. And Iman, that sits in my office in all my meetings, we have a bit of a chuckle because everyone walks in, sits down and goes, Luke, we're just average people. We're not extravagant. And we have a bit of a laugh. And I go, let me guess, the next line out of your mouth might be, we just need 50 grand a year to live. Or I just need $400,000 a year to live. I'm not extravagant. I shop at Target. And I think managing those internal expectations with the reality of the open market is where, again, you add huge value, because you can squash a deal. And it's not to hurt the people's feelings. It's to avoid them being misled through their own misconceptions of what is or isn't possible.
Yep, I'd agree with that statement. You're just an all-round good guy, Dave.
Do my best.
This guy over here. Hey?
Say no more. Say no more.
Okay.
Totally agree.
Before we wrap this up, it is time for a quick plug. So all of our guests, we ask them to do a bit of a shameless plug for themselves and their businesses.
Yeah.
So Luke, can you please tell our listeners where they can find you?
Yeah, so Envision Financial Services, we're in Phillip in the ACT, 6260-4749. We also have the Strategy Stacker podcast on iTunes and Spotify.
Yep.
We have the YouTube channel Envision Financial Canberra. And recently dropped, we have Smart Money Strategy, Your Ultimate Guide to Financial Planning. That was the book that I read, or the book that I wrote thinking of my mum, because I've tested analogies on her for 2 decades now, to the point where I can actually walk in and go, hey, Mum, she goes, look, I'll play with your kids, I'll feed you. Don't test another analogy on me. I'm over it. But that was the driver to try and sort of provide that easy reading level of education, because of those questions that I would get of, well, where do you read about this? Because people for many years were reluctant to go to a bank because they didn't want a product stuffed down their neck. And the nice thing about having a very open license is I can use anything in the open market that is right for you. Yeah. As long as we look at something and say, why have you got it? And what's it doing for you? And that's really sort of the philosophy that we have at Envision. And it's very hands-on. So we'll fund your retirement, we'll pay your bills, we'll buy your boats, we'll pay the caravan fees, we'll buy your flight centre vouchers, anything you need to go and be retired. I'm just here to provide peace of mind and avoid the need to say, I wish in any capacity. Yeah. And sometimes just to say, look, you can afford that flight, you can afford that seat. Actually, go back down to Flight Centre and get the upgrade for cost, and let's pay it out of the super fund, because the faster you run, the rainbow gets no closer. And I think as an advisor, it's getting people through that journey where you're very engaged in somebody's life and you can get them to try and use the resources and assets that they've amassed over their working life to have that lifestyle choice and to be able to do the things that they want to do, but have the peace of mind of knowing they can do it with what they're working with. And I think if we can align those two things, people generally sleep well at night.
Oh, I can think they would, yeah. I mean, you've got nothing to think about, really, do you?
Well, I think if we can take away what is retired and just say, where are we going, what are we doing, and how do we need it, that peace of mind element for me is vital, because I appreciate that it's frightening. I appreciate that it's different, and I find people's attitude towards controlling their income becomes far more heightened when you turn that salary tap off.
Yeah.
And that's been my approach for many, many years, and through to the day that I put my hand up and say, hey, my mates have either made me a billionaire or made me broke, which that's a sliding
50-50.
scale on it. Depends which mate we're talking about, but I think that's how we try and provide some help to people.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I think we've kind of wrapped this up. I think we're good.
I think we're good.
Nothing you want to ask, Dave?
No, I think we're all done. I'd just like to thank Luke for coming in
Pleasure.
today and
Love to. Very
having
exciting.
a chat.
Yeah,
And,
thank you, Dave, for joining us. And again, thank you, Luke, for joining us.
No
I know
dramas.
that you've got a radio show and a podcast and a YouTube channel that are all more successful than us here at Your Lending Era. But
Yeah, but you know what? I think like anything, it's that leap of kicking off and actually giving people the opportunity to learn and listen. And I think
Oh, God, yeah.
I think the audio space is far better than a book, because I try now and do everything by video.
Yeah.
And by audio, because we read enough.
Yeah.
I think people consume information differently, and we just need to give it to them in a way that, okay, I am driving to work, I've dropped the kids off, and I'm going to learn about an offset account. Right, let's listen to Your Lending Era and go, is that how they work? And it's just bubbling away in the background in the car. And I think that, everybody's a little bit different, but it's great to have a little bit of something for everyone.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. That was a little wrap for us. Thank you there, Luke.
Sweet as.
Okay, well, guys, if any of our listeners do want to get in touch with Luke, we'll have a link to Envision Financial in our show notes. And as always, you can give myself or Dave or anyone at Trilogy a call. We've all got Luke's email kind of in a very short format. We type Luke and he's the first person that comes up every time. So that's how often we communicate. But thank you very much, guys, for listening today. And as always, have a good one.
Will do. Thank you.
Cheerio.
Bye.